Hi, I'm Stuart Corrigan from Vanguard, and this short webinar is for you if you're a leader or a director of a housing system. So maybe you lead an RSL, maybe you're a senior manager in a local authority, and what you're interested in is how to improve your voids and allocation system. So what I'm going to be covering in this webinar is how do you let properties faster? How do you conduct refurbishments quicker and at less cost? And how do you deliver better service for customers? So let's talk very quickly about typical results. This is a client that we're working with right now. And what they're seeing is from keys in to the point of relet has reduced from an average of 84.3 days to an average of 37 days. Our refusal rate has gone from 50% to 22%, and rent arrears for new customers gone from 59% down to 11%. So significant improvement, and of course all of that also means significant increases in income and reduction in costs. So why are we doing this? Well, for the past 15 years that we've been open in Scotland, we've had a massive focus on housing systems, and in our opinion, of course, we know how to help leaders of housing systems better than anybody else. So we lead the field in this particular system. We also know that if you haven't heard of us, the best way for us to demonstrate our value to you is to provide some insight, and it's really our way of introducing ourselves and being helpful in what is currently, let's be honest, a very challenging economy. So what problems are we trying to help you solve? Well, number one, how do you get properties let faster at lower cost? Number two, how do you get the allocations and the void system to work better together? And number three, how do you create a management system that helps the leader to continue and keep on improving their business, improving speed, improving throughput, and reducing costs? So let's start by looking at a typical voids and allocation system. So what you can see here is, unbeknown to the leaders of this system, when you take all the voids that they'd let over this time period, you can see that actually it was taking round about 200 and odd days upper limit to let a void. Now what I mean by that is if somebody was to call in and say, what's the time it will take me to get my void property? Because of the way that the process varied and because the degree of variation in performance, the only honest answer you could give was round about 269 days or less, with an average of round about 70 days. But of course, not many customers are average customers. Now, because of the way that we look at measures and we use measurement in housing systems, typically the true performance of what's going on in the system is hidden from us. So here's what we've been told about how to manage voids and allocations. And these are the assumptions that we have to challenge if we want to get better and we want to improve our throughput. Number one, we should sort properties into easy to let and hard to let. Well, of course, the first challenge here is we all have different definitions of what is easy and what is hard. So before you know it, someone picks up a property in allocations and they said, well, that's one of the hard ones, so that gets put to the side. Before you know it, is what you have is two completely different systems. One system where all the potentially difficult to let properties are being put into that batch. Another system where what we focus on is the easy properties. And of course what then happens is backlogs are created, and what we then do is every so often move from working on the easy properties and have a focus on the hard properties. As we then focus on the hard properties, of course, the SLAs start to look bad for the easy properties, and really the life of someone who works in voids and allocations is Sometimes we focus on the easy ones, sometimes we focus on the hard ones. And what it's constantly doing is it's constantly making the system worse and making life worse for customers and for frontline staff, because we've created these dual systems. And of course, the longer we leave those difficult to let properties, the worse state of repair they're going to get into, and the less appetite there is to then do anything with them, because when they drop in to be let, they're going to mess up our service level agreements. Here's another client where essentially what you can see is the difficult to let properties were now taking anything up to 400 days to let, because the focus had simply gone on these properties. The second is to use service level agreements to improve the time to let. In other words, the assumption is, if what we do is we set a target on how long it will take to let the property, then of course, simply by setting that number, it will improve performance. Well, there's a problem with this. And the problem with service level agreements is, number one, is there's no science to setting the number. Often what happens is people just pluck a number out the air and that's the number that we're going to use. So we'll go for 5 days or 10 days or 15 days. The bigger problem is that the service level agreement can cause dysfunctional behaviour. In other words, once a property has gone out with the service level agreement, there may be no appetite to continue to try and let that property, because it doesn't count towards the numbers anymore. It's already past the service level agreement, so you may see systems where it just gets let go, or it gets put into the difficult to let property. The other thing that you'll see is, you may see this student syndrome behaviour where, although the property could have been done in 2 or 3 days, because the service level agreement has become a 10 or a 20 day service level agreement, a bit like when you were asked to do that essay at university and you were given 2 weeks to do it. Some of us might have gone home that night and immediately started to work on the essay. Some of us might have been struck by this thing called student syndrome, which is, if we can leave it till later, then we will. And what then happens is, because there are multiple service level agreements creating multiple priorities, and because there's no science to setting the number, in essence is, you see this phenomenon called multitasking, which is, rather than being focused on a small number of properties and really focused on throughput, remember what's the goal here? The goal is to let a property, not just to be busy. But what you see is, everybody's busy doing lots of work on lots of different properties, rather than focusing on getting a property ready to let and getting the customer into that property so that we can start to collect rent. Here's a great example of this, where this is housing associations' end-to-end time for letting properties. Now what you can see already is that the end-to-end time for all of those properties is getting worse literally by the day. Now what's interesting is, when we tracked the performance of end-to-end times for this client, the only thing that had changed when they were doing all properties in round about 8 or 9 days was that someone said, let's put in a service level agreement. You can't, after all, manage without a service level agreement. And simply by putting in a service level agreement that says you now have 10 or 15 or 20 days to manage these different properties and putting them into different categories with different service level agreements, then in essence what happened was student syndrome reigned and everything took longer. That's the only thing that changed, and as you can see in the graph, all properties started to take longer to let, until what you then have is this easy and hard, these two systems, and a big backlog of difficult properties to deal with. Isn't it interesting that the problem didn't exist until the SLAs were changed? The next thing we've been told about managing void properties is that what we should do is we should batch properties that have the same types of repairs. or that are in the same geographic area. And of course the goal is keep the teams busy. Now the big problem here is that what we'll do, as I say, is we'll batch the same type of repair or in the same area, and we'll say, let's all go and work on that group of properties. The problem is, of course, is what we're doing is we're working on a property that potentially doesn't have anybody ready to move into it. So we have lots of properties ready to let, but the people in allocations haven't been focused on the same priority rule, so they've got lots of people ready for properties that are currently not ready to let. So what happens is everybody's busy working on lots of properties, but we're not focused on doing the right property at the right time. As a result, everything takes much longer, and what we then have to do often is use overtime to expedite properties to get the property that we need ready for the person that wants that properties. So batching properties and simply keeping the tradesman busy by doing the same repairs across lots of different properties actually is going to make things take longer. So here's the counterintuitive solution. Number one is, what we have to do is create a system that works on letting the properties as they become available. In other words, we move away from easy and hard, we put everything into the one pot, and what we then start to do is work on first in, first out. That way it creates a focus. The second thing is we have to have one priority rule. We move away from a 5-day, a 10-day, a 20-day, a 30-day. We move away from easy, hard. We move away from focus on that area or that area, and we just move to a single priority rule. And what we also have to do is create a system that causes focus. Now the way that we do this is by limiting the release of properties both into the allocations flow and into the refurbishment team's flow. What that does is it causes that team to focus on working on the right property at the right time. It may mean, of course, that that team has to focus on how do we multi-skill. But because it drives that focus, and because what the team are now focused on is we know that this property has somebody going into it on Monday, rather than let's just get the property ready because that's the one that we can work on, that's the one that potentially we maybe have a painter available for. Then what we've also started to see is that people whose job previously maybe was just to do painting or just to do joinery will say, right, what do we need to do to work better as a team so that actually what we focus on is getting that property ready for that particular customer. So throughput goes up, we get more people into the right properties quicker, and of course what happens is that we collect more rent faster. So costs go down, revenue increases. And the key, as I say, is think about this as choking the release of work. Imagine a huge to-do list where you come in every day and you're focused on this hundreds of items on your to-do list. Often that's what the voids and allocation system is like. Now if what you do is you do lots of bits of work across that to-do list, you'll be busy all day long, but you won't actually get any items done. And what we therefore need to do is apply the same rule that we'd apply to the to-do list, which says, let's create a clear priority rule, which ones are we going to work on? Let's then make sure that we're only allowing some properties into the system enough to ensure that we don't do this multitasking thing where we do lots of bits of work on lots of properties, and therefore we create a focus on getting a property refurbished and getting it ready for the tenant that's going into it. So we create this singular focus to get properties out, and as one goes out, one is allowed in to the system. The other principle is to make sure that all the work is visible. So we'll have some properties that are waiting to go into the queue and some properties that are now live. And what we have to do is that make sure that the progress of all live properties can be seen at all times. Those that are not live cannot be worked therefore. In other words, we cannot use capacity to do something that's not ready to go into the flow. Because guaranteed, if we steal that capacity to do something simply because that property is near to another property, when we need the capacity of that particular tradesman, he or she won't be available because they're working on the wrong thing at the wrong time. We also have to create an escalation rule so that we can pull leaders in to work on the right property at the right time. In other words, when a property is blocked, we want a clear communication system which helps senior leaders understand when do I have to intervene and when do I not have to intervene. What we've also been doing with some housing associations is making sure that those properties that we know are going to be very, very challenging to let is sending a signal straight to marketing the minute they go live, so that marketing are starting to work on those properties long before they're actually ready to go onto the market. And of course what we need to do is move away from SLAs and measure end-to-end times so that we've got this true visibility of how long it's taking to let a property. It sometimes may mean that it doesn't make for pleasant reading, but it'll give us the truth as to what's going on in our system. And once we know the truth, of course, we can start to act on it and start to improve the way that the voids and allocation system works. And here's the way that we help leaders understand how the whole system works so that they know what to take action on. In the middle column, and this is a real voids and allocations visual measures board, in the middle column you can see the key numbers used in control charts end to end so that we can get a true indication of how the performance of the system is running. On the left, what you'll see is if the middle piece is the outputs, then on the left is the inputs. The new rules that we're working to make sure that everybody is working to those rules, because of course our scientific hypothesis, if you want to put it that way, is if we follow these rules then we'll get these outputs. And we know that the new rules should work because of course what we've done is we've been out and we've studied the system, we've understood what was the problem with the old way of working. So, you know, the two systems using the SLAs, multiple priority rules, flooding the people with work and replacing those with end-to-end measures, limiting the release of work, single priority rule. And if we work to those inputs, then of course what we should see is an improvement in the system. And where there are still problems, you'll see right across on the far left is we have a system for capturing those problems and aggregating them so that those most important problems get passed to the most senior leaders, so that again they're not being fed 20, 30, 40 problems every week, they're only being fed the correct number of problems and the most important problems for them to work on, so that they're constantly improving the system, getting more throughput, more rental income and less costs in the system. Of course, how do you make the change? Well, the first thing you have to understand and you have to make visible is what are the rules that underpin the design and management of your system. Do you have multitasking? Do you use SLAs? Do you have multiple priority rules? Are you flooding the system with work? Are people batching and queuing the work in order to optimize journey time rather than doing the properties in the right order according to customer demand? You have to study that. And of course that's what we specialize in, is we help leaders understand how to study their system and how to create a situation where frontline staff can get involved and study the system and can be part of the solution, a scientific solution in essence, born out of studying to create a better system, a better design to get better performance. So if what you'd like is some support on how to study the system. Of course, you may have watched this webinar and said, thank you very much, Stuart, we've got some great ideas, we're going to go off and try some things, and that's absolutely fine. But if you're one of the people who said, yes, I would like some support, yes, I would like to understand how to study our system so that we can understand the rules that underpin the design and management of work, create a new set of rules and create an intervention that makes massive change, then we'd love to hear from you. Click the button which is labelled Diagnostic Advice and Support. Download the PDF. It will give you an understanding of what we do over a short period of time to help you out with a diagnostic. Get in touch and we'll talk from there. Thank you very much for tuning in to the short webinar, and I really hope it's created value for you and that we meet at some point in the future. Thank you.